check out our extended interview with Mellin, painter and environmental activist. Haley, welcome to the first version of No Reserves in the Studio. You're the first artist that I wanted to go see in this lockdown. In fact, I'd wanted to set up a studio visit before this, and March hit, and now it's like during all this COVID, what's it mean? What's it like to be an artist during this turbulent period?
Well, it's great to see you, Josh, digitally, and it's an honor to be doing this with you. I think that being an artist now is similar to how it's been for thousands of years. I mean, you have a sense of urgency. You want to document the time that you're working in. You want to respond to it. You want to be accurate. At the same time, there's also a sense of patience, because you want to make something that lasts and that has legacy to it and that endures. So I think there's this conflicting sort of speed and then also hold back just to look and to pay attention.
I think for a lot of artists, maybe the idea of a lockdown was great in that you could spend all this time at home in your own head, but at the same time you've been super involved with the world around you, and we'll talk about your role as an environmental activist. I mean, you're coming to us from almost the epicenter of Northern California with all this climate change that you've been involved with. How has that affected your head in this time?
Well, as they say, climate change is very real. Outside right now, the sun is red and the sky is white. And so it's very clear how much we're impacting the planet. And that's just very much right at home. I tend to travel most of the year for land conservation work. And so this has been new, to be in one place for 7 months. I like it. I'm definitely a homebody. That said, the last trip I took prior to this was to Colombia in February, prior to lockdown, to meet with the Minister of the Environment and the Director of the National Parks there to talk about making the last national park that Colombia will declare. So I was there, and I think I have a picture here. There's me and the Minister of the Environment. And we were there to do a due diligence visit, so I was in the landscape for most of the trip, but also there to ask them for matching funds from their carbon fuel tax. So it was sort of a work meeting, but at the same time we were on the ground. And to be there and now to be here is quite a change.
Have you noticed that institutions, galleries, museums, artists are taking a step back, maybe with the time they have to be around, or what's going to rethink their footprint in the world beyond their little museum, gallery, or studio?
Yeah, I think that's very well said. I think artists and friends of mine who are still working in their studios, some who are working from home, are paying attention to the very place they occupy. I think it's been a grounding time, definitely a very reflective time. And I've seen some exceptional paintings come out of this period. In terms of institutions and the world around us, if we're talking about climate, since we were talking earlier about fires, I see institutions becoming exceptionally emboldened in making decisive action toward their climate effects and their footprint. You have the ICA in LA going fully solar. The Guggenheim, I worked with them in offsetting their Rem Koolhaas show, so they did a full carbon neutral exhibition. I think it was the first in the US. And you have organizations like Hauser and Wirth that are deeply connected to the planet, to natural solutions, to climate change. So it's great to see what people are doing, and I'm just so excited to think, a couple of years from now, what more people will be doing to be responsible for the space that they occupy.
I don't think you give yourself enough credit. You've raised, close to $100 million personally to buy back land in the rainforest. How much land have you actually reclaimed, and how is that not just a one-time thing? How is that managed going into the future?
I think that's a great question. I spend about 30% of my time in the studio painting and about 70% working on large-scale land conservation. And as a kid, I just knew I wanted to conserve a few million acres on behalf of myself and other artists. I didn't really know what an acre was. I didn't know how big it was. And so in moving forward, I started working with artists in doing that and founded a nonprofit called Art to Acres, where one artwork conserves one location. So like recently we worked with a 22-inch by 18-inch painting, and it conserved 2 million acres of indigenous land in Peru. And half of that land is now also going to be a national park. So in doing so, over time, I guess we've worked with about 45 artists and one collector. Agnes Gunn conserved land with a beautiful Ed Ruscha. And I really like the process. I love working with artists because they're really direct. They tell you what they're looking for. And I think that an artwork and a large-scale landscape are rather similar because both things are about legacy. They're about what endures and a sense of permanence. You know, we make national parks or we make large-scale land locations. We conserve them for the future. And the same thing with paintings is we make a painting or a drawing now to speak into time. So I really
how
like
has this
them both.
affected your own painting? And you're doing these large-scale projects, but you tend to do smaller paintings. How do they intersect? They seem like you talked about them each being part of your daily work. I would guess they're both completely part of your daily work. How do they relate, or do you even think of them as independent or codependent?
Yeah, I think they're very much one and the same thing. I tend to spend a lot of my days on conference calls, on due diligence calls, on legal reviews, on financial audits, and then I tend to sort of meditate and focus through making the paintings or drawings. One thing that has really changed is because I travel so much now. I used to have a great studio in Red Hook, a few blocks from Carol Beauvais' studio on the water, and I had to let go of that studio. So I'm traveling so much that I put the paintings in boxes. They go on airplanes, which means the size has gotten a lot smaller because you can only work with a 60-inch circumference when you're shipping on a plane. And then when I'm on site, I'll be often working on landscapes where we're conserving. Sometimes I'll be doing actual portraits of the people we're traveling with or some of the conservationists. So I think that they do have a relationship, and it's somewhat of a handshake between one and the other.
What are you working on now?
Oh, that's a great question. I'm working on, I don't know if we can see it, but this is a location that we're conserving in Colombia, and I'm working on a painting right in the center from that region. Can you see that okay? Got it? So I've been working on some observational landscapes, and I tend to like to work observationally because I like to see the thing I'm working on. I like to be in person. And so I'm just cleaning up those drawings.
How do you feel making still lives, landscapes, and understanding the history of art, but sort of still being part of this contemporary art world and the historic avant-garde and all that? Does it feel at peace that you're looking back in sort of, I wouldn't say ancient methods, but certainly more old-fashioned methods, at the same time being highly involved in cutting edge, emerging, and front page kind of art world that we both function in?
I think that's a great question, Josh. The trajectory I've had to learn how to paint has mostly been through looking at books of old master paintings and copying them over and over again. And so I spent as a teenager most of my days with people who were dead. I just really looked up to old masters, and that's how I learned my skill set. I was also really fortunate to work with two South African English women who I studied closely with while I was going to Berkeley undergrad. And that was a phenomenal experience to just focus strongly on technique. So in terms of painting, I really do like old methods. I like working in etching and in charcoal. I do quite a lot of very detailed oil paintings, and that's just, I guess that's my thing.
Well, I'm wondering about it in opposition to like all the conceptual art, digital art, video art. I would say that, in fact, you're doing land art, which is kind of like a almost a performative piece too. But there seems that painters are going their own way. At the same time, all this content and political content and technology involved, that to be actually painting outside as you travel seems unusual in some ways too.
Yeah, I think that's very well said. When I was doing my doctoral study, I focused my dissertation on what is a painting in a digital age. What is it like to look at a painting online? What is the experience of presence through a digital means for a more historic object, right? Because paint is largely just color and medium and cloth, which we can agree is a very early sort of art form. And so during that time, I was actually really focused on making digital real paintings. I've been working for a number of years on a series of banana paintings. I have some here that I've kept over time. And my interest in doing that kind of work was to really, like, how graphic could I make the painting? How could I make it look somewhat like a digital print? So I think that different artists have their own ways of engaging the contemporary, but mine is really to focus on climate, because climate is our big challenge for the coming 50 years, I would argue, and it's going to be the challenge within my lifetime. And so that's why I focus on tropical land conservation. Sometimes we conserve boreal forests, but trees are our best technology for bringing carbon out of the atmosphere. They're our oldest technology, and they're really affordable to engage. So that's why we conserve large-scale forests.
I was looking at your paintings of bananas, and it reminded me of being sort of the polar opposite, but almost the same thing, of my favorite artwork of 2019. Can you guess where I might be going there?
Yeah, the Maurizio Catalan.
Maurizio Catalan's. Now, if I could have bought one work of art for myself last year, and some people will look at me strangely, I'm looking at my wife, it's like, I know, but the Maurizio Catalan banana, I thought was maybe the singular work of art last year. And is it more poignant now? Is he something that you're thinking about, but from a completely different vantage point? Is he, in fact, quite political and on point with that work? Or maybe you hate it?
That's a great question. I think that's a great question. I really enjoyed the work. I continue to enjoy it. I like how it continues to pop up in different forms. Matthew Israel just published a great book with it on its cover. And overall, I think he's talking about a lot of different things at once. I agree with you. I think it would be a good work to own.
Now, speaking of how to own work and the digital and the real, 6 months without travel in the studio, you're doing shows. Are your works being seen mostly online? How are you able to support yourself? What's the art market? I know we talk about that a little bit, but yeah, it's Josh, a fact of life of artists to support yourself.
Since lockdown, over the summer, actually, there were quite a lot of shows. I noticed curators were very, very busy, very focused, and I think I was in about 6 shows over the summer. Half of them were in person, and half of them were more virtual. So there was a great exhibition that Alexander Bergruen did that was online. I did a show with the Journal Gallery in New York, which was also online. But some were more, I would say, ephemeral. There was an exhibition that Brooke Wise, who's a young curator, put together, and she asked everyone to send in a black and white drawing. And then she compiled them into a PDF. She made a coloring book called the Pandemic Coloring Book, and you could download it. You'd get drawings by all of these artists, and then you could literally color them in with your children, and you made a donation to Meals for Wheels. In fact, I made this tree, which I drove up the road, took a long hike, and found like an oak tree, and so that was my contribution. In terms of in-person shows, I did an exhibition with F. Houston, so that was in person. It was shipped and sent, and the painting was of a Latin American landscape that we've been working on conserving, and it was actually bought by a Latin American art collector, which I thought was really lovely.
Well, now's your chance. If we were in the studio, we'd be sort of talking both ways. You have anything you want to
I
ask
have a lot of questions.
me?
I have a lot of questions to ask you, and you guys can just keep the ones that you like. In making this video series, what have you been learning about the process? What are you liking? What is a challenge?
I think art's a visual medium, and in the digital world, we've been avoiding trying to make things visually compelling. So trying to use a representation of people and as a representation of art and make it visually compelling and deal with people's attention span because they're getting too much information of how to choose things. So to really try to make things that I would find interesting and hope that others would.
And
I meant to say that's a really good question. What else you got for me?
In terms of your work with your nonprofit, how has this time, maybe you could talk a little bit about the work that you do, but also how has this time shifted that work, and what are your goals moving forward?
Well, I think everybody's had the time to really focus a little bit on what's really most important. I'm proud that on about the 1st of April, my wife and I launched a program to give money to artists and art workers and gave out over 100 grants and about $60,000 with contributions from readers of the Baer Faxt without any process. So to be able to mobilize quickly, the art world has a lot of money around it, and while it's about the money, there's also a lot of people there who want to do good things. So I find it reaffirming people's commitment to like, okay, we can both do things that are $1 million paintings, and we can buy 1 million acres of land, and we can help 1,000 artists who need a hand just overnight, that we can be walking and chewing gum at the same time.
I agree with you. I think that now more than ever is a time to do good, and it's a really great community in which to come together and make long-term or permanent impact. So I agree with you there. What have you been seeing
Do you feel the climate change move within the museums? That's not just this week's political fad. Do you think that's going to be long-lasting? And
yeah, to me, climate is an awareness thing, right? I mean, I don't want to get too gross, but the truth is we pay someone to take away our garbage, and we pay someone to take away our sewage. And we continue to breathe in and out. We let go of carbon dioxide. Everything we do makes carbon dioxide, but it's an invisible gas. And so we've never had to be responsible for it as a release. It's been, building up in our atmosphere, and it's making our planet hotter. And so what we need to do is just draw that gas back down. So I think that institutions are just becoming aware, like we all are, of what this means, of this great opportunity we have right now to engage before, quote unquote, it's too late, which is a truth, and to move forward and once again do the right thing. It's very easy to do. I mean, a large scale exhibition could have carbon drawn down for maybe $150. It's not a it's not a major financial reach, but it is a pretty major educational reach. And so when people start doing this, other people become aware and they say, hey, I want to do that too. So overall, I really do think institutions are in it for the long haul. There's great people involved. They're really committed. And one of the things I love is that people are coming together. There's a new organization in New York called Art to Zero that's been working on supporting studios and galleries, et cetera, in becoming carbon or net zero neutral. There's another group initiative that I really, really like called Galleries Commit. And it's working within New York in terms of how can galleries come together and do everything from being responsible to single-use plastics, but also like looking at the building, like how environmentally suitable is the building. So overall, there's great energy coming together. And I think it's a really exciting time to be part of this conversation.
So, Haley, one of the things that I admire most is your optimism as a person, as an artist, and as someone who's actually doing something rather than just talking about it. So going forward, what do you see on the horizon, both for you, for Northern California, for the art world? What's on the horizon?
Well, Josh, I think that there's a number of different things people are engaging. On my end, land conservation or making new national parks is a slow process. So in this year, we engaged 6 different locations, mostly in South and Central America. Next year, I'm really focusing on a project up in the top of Canada in the northern Yukon. I'd really love to work with a family or a private collection in terms of one work and one place, but from the collector's end, I tend to mostly work through artists other than the Ruche from Gund. And so that would be exciting for me. I think that land conservation and art has a major history. I mean, you have the family that co-founded MoMA, also conserving the Grand Tetons in the US. And I think that people understand how these two things come together, all the more so with climate and the fact that land is some of our best resource for calming the climate and stabilizing it. That over time, land conservation is going to become all the more interesting to people. My excitement is that institutions are doing what works for them. So you have Christie's coming in and doing a 50% reduction in printed material. You have Hauser and Wirth coming in and doing all sorts of support for natural solutions. Some such as, foregoing a dinner and then, having a major impact on tropical forests through that conservation. And so overall, coming together from different people's vantage points makes a lot of sense. My experience also from artists is that people right now are looking at all sorts of macro and micro ways they can engage. There's going to be a new website that's going to be put online called Barter, and you can go and trade or give away things that you have that you don't necessarily need in the studio. So overall, my sense is that artists are exceptionally resourceful. They focus on creativity, and it's creativity that's going to bring us past some of these incredible challenges we have coming up.
Here's a question. So whose art are you looking at now? Who are you most interested in out there to see? Whose studio do you want to go to back in real life? Your first in-person studio visit where you're not with another artist.
Oh, I'm going to play favorites here. I don't think I can do that, Josh.
How about our friend Rashid Johnson? Let's go see Rashid together.
Okay,
No Reserve.
Let's do a new take. I think that's a good idea.
Okay.
Well, I think for No Reserve, well, no, I can't say that. Last night I was looking all at Monk and Lucian Freud, so I don't think you can visit those studios, but I think visiting Rashid Johnson's studio, I think he's been working out in the Hamptons. I would love to see that.
We'll see if we can make that happen. Rashid, if you're listening, we're coming for you. It's going to be hard to say no to us.
Yeah. I think, I want to ask you one more question, if you wouldn't mind. I want to ask you about the nonprofit work you do, not the new one, but the annual, your longer term.
Avenues for Justice.
Avenues for Justice. Josh, can you tell me a little bit about Avenues for Justice?
Avenues for Justice is an alternative to incarceration for youth in New York and Lower East Side and East Harlem that's been going about 40 years, that's worked with thousands and thousands of teenagers to turn their life around, keep them out of prison, save the state of New York about $1 billion in tax dollars. 90% of these kids never get rearrested. So in my mind, as the chairman of the board, now chairman emeritus, it's like the best thing that I do out there. It has nothing to do with my business, my money, who I might meet. It's just like there's hundreds of grassroots charities in our major cities that are really doing great things. And if everybody does just a little bit, we make our cities better. So I'm proud of that work and teaching my daughter about that too. One more question to sort of fill in. your environmental land conservation work, how did you get into it? Did someone introduce you to it? Was there a moment that really pushed you in that direction? How did that come from just you as a painter to what you've accomplished now?
Yeah, when I was a kid, I was really clear that I wanted to conserve a few million acres of land, and I grew up in a place that was rather wild. I think being an artist, you have an interest in the natural phenomenon, the artifacts of everyday life, and so nature was pretty astounding to me. Nature was something that I really connected with growing up, and in I think when I was about 20, or 22 actually, I knew I wanted to conserve land with people within the art community, because those two disciplines seem to make sense together, and they seem to be about, legacy, what we leave behind, a sort of a deeper sight, so this notion of what can be permanent, from our questions, from our stories, from our busyness and our trials and tribulations. So I saw the notion that paintings are a very human maintained space, whereas wilderness in a way is a non-human space, and I liked that you could have some sort of dialogue between selling a painting and conserving quite a lot of land. Also, you have paint artists, some of our most expensive real estate per square inch, and wilderness is currently some of our least expensive. So those dynamics and metrics made sense to me, and I spent about 15 years learning and talking to advisors and mentors, and I have a great group of advisors who over the years have helped me into the path I am on now. People like Jack Dangerman, Chris Tompkins, Peggy Delaney, who have done some of the largest land conservation projects of our times, and who also have very interesting art backgrounds and visual backgrounds. And one of the things that I would do is I would travel to meet with these individuals, and we'd talk about the ins and outs of how you do great permanent conservation projects, and those lessons stay with me in how I work today. And conservation is very similar to the art world. You put one foot in front of the other. You get up every day and you do a little bit more. And it's just one long story. So one of the things I find is that it's also a very small community, like the art community. I really like the people involved. They're great human beings, and they're very optimistic, because you wouldn't do this if you weren't optimistic. And then lastly, on an anecdotal line, one of the things I love about land conservation is after you've done all the contracts and the money and you spent time and work, you haven't done anything at all, because all you've done is made this like little invisible line around a space, letting it continue to be exactly what it always was. So it's this very sort of, for lack of a better word, Zen activity, because there's so much work, and then the thing looks like it looked before you started. So it's very humbling as well.
Kind of like what having a child feels like as a parent. Of all, you've done all this big complex thing, and then there's this simple little piece of protoplasm that's complicated around you, and you've built this line around it, but it's its own thing too. So
I think that's a great analogy, Josh. I think our artworks, some buildings, some texts, and our children and our national parks are really what we leave behind from this struggle. So it's very well said.
Well, Haley, thanks for letting us in. We're going to post a number of those organizations that you mentioned to let our viewers connect to them and actually maybe donate to them or start to work with them, so that something tangible will come out of this, our first episode of In the Studio on No Reserve.
It's a pleasure to do it with you today, Josh. Thank you.